Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Isaac. Happy Mother's Day, and of course when I say Happy Mother's Day I don't really mean it, because I think the Mother's Day is already over. It's also one of those things which is really different depending on where you're from, and as far as I know in some countries it even changes on a yearly basis, it's not always on the same date. But the problem is that because this date was hard-coded in the game, or at least with how dailies are implemented, they're hard-coded into the game, so they essentially can't change the dates unless they would release a different patch for it, but obviously they're not going to release one single patch just to change the date of a daily or whatever. And considering there are 3 special dailies a month, I assume they want to keep that, so changing that to a different date or maybe even a different month would be really unwarranted, I think, and they decide not to do it. So it's just a better idea for what he had, and then again it's nice to have a commemoration of all mothers out there that exist in the world, because they sure as hell deserve it. Of course, not all of them probably, but I would say that most mothers do deserve some form of commemoration, of course, because Isaac is such a game which revolves around his mother, and mother plays a very pivotal role. It just feels very fitting that this is an actual day that is celebrated or at least commemorated in dailies. Okay, but what do we actually have on our hands here? Well, considering it's Mother's Day, we have basically 3 mom items. That's mom's lipstick, mom's eye, and mom's pad, and all three of these items are actually really bad. They don't do anything too significant, but they're also one of the oldest items in the game, and they do have some sentimental value. Whenever I do see a mom's pad or maybe a mom's lipstick, I always get a bit excited, because I feel like those are the items which have been in the game for so long, and they just present something different to us. They just basically tell us, okay, you know, this is going back to the basics. They're just a range upgrade, and in the case of mom's pad, it's just an item that fears enemies in the room. It reminds us of simpler times that existed in the game, where those things were actually somewhat decent. Of course, range is a stat that was kind of overshadowed in Afterbirth. I think it did get a back of its potential in Afterbirth Plus, although I'm not really sure why I feel that way, but I always valued range a bit higher than maybe some people did, and that's not necessarily wrong or right, I'm just maybe saying my opinion. But mom's pad is definitely an active item which doesn't have a ton of uses. The only use I can think of it is when you have a room full of enemies which charge you down, and then you pop it to actually fear them and they actually run away from you, and that's usually a good usage of it, but that happens so rarely I can't consider it a good item at all. So it's just one of those mech starts which really doesn't do anything, but at least mom's eye is fun, because if you have some items or if you have enough luck, you're basically shooting into directions, and that's pretty good, especially when you have something like mom's knife. Then you can be the Beyblade of death with knives around your head, and that's always exciting. But okay, so it was also, oh right, of course, one thing I didn't mention is that there are no treasure rooms in these dailies, and because of that, it does tend to be a bit of a harder daily. Even if you do start out with these 3 kind of relatively underpowered items, it doesn't make up for the fact that you're missing all these treasure rooms. So of course, what we're kind of banking on here is just getting good devil deals, or maybe angel deals, or maybe even finding some items in the secret rooms. And actually, that's exactly what happened. We got the humbling bundle in the shop, which is just great. We got the room back in this particular secret room, but we also got some damage ups in the case of Cat of Ninetails, but also Maw of the Void. And Maw of the Void is just one of those items which can carry the run by itself. It's not super powerful, but it's always at least fun to use. It has one of those mechanics which I feel makes it for a really interesting item. It's a powerful item if you do know how to use it to its biggest advantage, and it can be very detrimental if you're too aggressive in it, and that just leads to a lot of potential high damage penalty. But some people maybe know how to use it a bit better, and they can actually get a lot of usage out of it, and because of that, I consider it one of the more fair overpowered items, if that makes sense, just because it does require you to think and play a little bit differently, which I think not a lot of people are used to, or at least maybe they didn't really have the chance to train that. And because it is a charging item, you're still able to shoot and actually rely on your normal tiers, where you're still using that circle of death to kill enemies. And what's maybe even greater about it is that it does have a chance to give you black hearts, and that's so very important on a daily that goes to Mom's Cart, or just any basically daily that doesn't go to the end, so to Mega Satan, or maybe to the Dark Room, or to the chest, because you want to use those sacrifice shrooms, and in order to do that you need healths lying around, and if you have a way to generate them with Maw of the Void, that's usually a pretty good deal. So it's one of those items which really encompasses everything that you would possibly need. It's a damage up, it's a nice way to deal with enemies, it's a really good at killing bosses, because 1 or 2 or maybe 4 at most charges will essentially kill a boss if you're really diligent and really careful about it. So it just allows you to do all sort of crazy things. But of course, thankfully, because we did get some of these good items early on, then we weren't really strapped for anything else, so we were kind of set from that very first devil deal. Of course, I did get some utility items, like I mentioned, the room bag and the humbling bundle. They're all great items to just get a lot of consumable points and just a lot of points in general, but also there's no that pressure on us to actually complete and get an even better run going. Of course, if we are going to the dark room, we would probably need something else, because this just isn't that strong enough, but if we're going just to the womb or maybe to Shoal, I feel like this loadout is already strong enough that we really don't need any more DPS items. Of course, they would be welcome. I'm not saying that I wouldn't take them, but I'm just saying that I feel comfortable on taking the game with this particular loadout because I feel like it's strong enough. Also, another thing that I would like to mention here is I picked up that cat, and again, of course, a lot of people do like that cat. You might understand why I picked it up. Obviously, there's the potential for the guppy transformation, but the reason why I picked it up is just to get down to that 1 red health. And my thinking was, I got hit a lot during this boss rush. It was one of the hardest boss rushes I've experienced in a very long time. It was a champion version of boss rush, so every enemy was champions that were dealing a lot of damage, and also the combination of bosses was kind of unfortunate, but also apparently, not apparently, but I was so unlucky that I always spawned on the wrong side, and I didn't see what the other boss was. So what ended up happening quite often is that the boss on the other side of the room, which I didn't see, maybe darkened the room and then teleported on top of me and just dealt some unnecessary damage, which could have been avoided if I was maybe moving a little bit more, or if I was just standing on the right side of the room, or at least in the right position. Of course, I tried to reposition, and as soon as I do that and move to the top of the room so I could actually see both enemies, then Gertie spawns and deals damage for me, because I think he, maybe another, maybe more as well, but basically there are 2 bosses which spawn in that position, and I was so unlucky that exactly one of them spawned in that particular time instance where I decided to go up. So maybe next time I should go down, because that still allows you to see both bosses instead of going up, but I just prefer being up because I feel like I have more control of the room. And in general, whenever you're playing Isaac, you really try not to stay on top of enemies or below them, because the rooms are much narrower than they are wide, which means that you can have much more room maneuvering if you're actually going from left to right and shooting in that direction. Of course, if you're shooting from up and down, you can still hit enemies, but it's much significantly harder because of perspective, and it's just one of those things which really I don't think goes noticed, but it's also so very intrinsic and so kind of makes sense when you play it, the game. You don't really have to think about it, it's just something that happens automatically. You try to position yourself to the left or to the right of the enemy instead of below or not below, or what's the opposite of below? I can't remember. The opposite of below is above them. Yeah, that's that took me way too long. Yeah, so above or below them, and then of course that does allow you to deal with enemies. Some enemies a bit more elegantly. Of course, with some enemies you do have to stay above or below them, and that just means a different type of tactic. But I mean, just in general, it's a better idea to stay to the left or the right. I did get kind of sidetracked, but I did decide to pick up that scat to get that 1 health reduction, because I felt like I really need to be at 1 red health in order to maximize my points usage, and of course that would allow me to go to those boss rooms. But it also can be very useful just to have that cat. There's something I did yesterday that I didn't really mention, but I just essentially used plan C to kill Hush, and that's something that's maybe a bit unwarranted. I essentially risked 11 of my hearts to get back to 1 red health, and in order to mitigate all the damage that the Hush could have done to me. And I thought that was a good play in that sense, but also you have to be careful because you still have 8 lives, you know, you don't only have 1 respawn, but you essentially have 8 separate hearts, and I think that's the best way to look at it. And I just basically took it for that utility sake, so if something did happen, of course, that I would still be able to regenerate my health, and that I would still have some backup to go on. So if I found something like a plan C, and if I decided to use it in a particular room to kill enemies because I figured they were too hard or whatever, then I could have done that, and that would have probably worked out pretty well for me. Besides that, this run is kind of nearing to an end. I was hoping for something like a sacrifice room here, but sadly that didn't show up, so I really didn't have much to do, but also because our run didn't improve particularly. I think the only item that we got from boss rush was butt bombs, which is like 5 bombs, which is not that significant, but also thankfully to humbling bundle we were able to pretty much max out our consumables. You can see that we almost have 99 of each except keys, but also because I kept the jar, I decided to break with that. Of course, with humbling bundle, every time you pick a heart it turns into 2 hearts, then you can drop it on the ground and then you can pick it up again, and that way you can just generate an infinite amount of hearts, and because you can keep dropping and picking them up, you're getting points but you're not losing them, and that just allows you to break the Shrek bonus, and of course you end up with the Shrek bonus as high as the exploration bonus, which is pretty exciting when you think about it. There are a few things I could have improved, definitely. I think one of those things was that I wasn't moving fast enough. Again, this is a typical problem of mine. I did get hit a few too many times in boss rush. It was a particularly difficult one, but still I feel like I could have done a little bit better. But overall, I did enjoy this run. I did finish in a relatively good spot. It's always nice to see a single digit in your score, and I think I was 5th at the time of the recording, so there weren't even a lot of cheaters on this daily, which is exciting in some regard, but also kind of disappointing, because obviously if I was 7th in game and then 1st on the actual leaderboards, that would have been a bit better. But still, I can't complain too much. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.